Joe Biden has called into his friends over at MSNBC in a desperate attempt to prove all is well, but ended up sounding like a drunk, incoherent mess.
The reason I've been out on the road so much, all over the country, and while Trump is riding around in his golf cart, filling out his golf cart before he even hits the ball. But anyway, he hadn't been anywhere in 10 days. I've been all over the country.
Yes, all is well. He then really went off the rails.
Come on, give me a break. Come with me. Watch. I'm getting so frustrated by the elites. Now, I'm not talking about you guys, but about the elites in the party who they know so much more. But if any of these guys don't think I should run against me, go ahead, announce for president. Challenge me at the convention.
Did Hunter Biden help him write his interview notes today? And just in case we needed more evidence, the White House is babying the leader of the free world. They announced the president will hold a big boy press conference.
After that, the president will hold a press conference, I guess a big boy press conference is what we're calling it, and take some questions from y'all.
This week, President Biden will speak to national labor leaders of AFL-CIO, host the NATO summit to show the unprecedented strength of our alliance, hold a press conference, a big boy press conference.
Yes, he's a big boy now. Will they teach him to potty train next? I'm sure Dr. Jill will be on standby to help.
Joe, you did such a great job. You answered every question. You knew all the...
Speaking of, who is actually running for president? It's stage mum, Dr. Jill.
For all the talk out there about this race, Joe has made it clear that he's all in. And just as always, as he has supported my career, I'm all in too.
I bet you are, Dr. Jill. Let's bring in Newsweek Senior Editor-at-Large and Article 3 Project Senior Counsel, Josh Hammer. Josh, what exactly is a big boy press conference? I mean, how much longer can the White House keep treating him like a toddler?
Yeah, your guess is as good as mine. I have no idea what a big boy press conference is supposed to be, but I'm happy that you played that clip of Dr. Jill Biden congratulating Joe Biden after the debate for actually answering every question. Look, what you're seeing is not just the infantilization of the American presidency. It's actually much worse than just infantilizing the purported leader of the free world. What you've seen now, Axios, some other American political outlets have started to report, you're now seeing the media cop up to and admit the fact that Biden's handlers, even inside the White House, for the past year and a half, 2 years at least, maybe even longer than that, have prevented information that the commander-in-chief ought to know from getting to him. He is not the one making the decisions here, and that ought to trouble every single person, not just in America, but frankly, all over the world. And it's just deeply ironic, even above that, because this is the Democratic Party. They're making a whole stink of the fact that Donald Trump allegedly represents a mortal threat to American democracy. They call themselves the party of democracy. I mean, don't look at the fact that they're prosecuting and trying to incarcerate the political opposition, but even holding that massive thing aside for a second, how is it democratic to not even know who was running the country? How is it democratic to now openly talk of trying to do a coup at the convention and topple the guy that your own primary voters just voted for? That would be the antithesis of democracy, at least as I understood. So there's more wrong here than I possibly could get to in our conversation, but these clips at a bare minimum ought to be deeply disturbing.
Well, they are deeply disturbing. And, I've got to ask the question, who is actually running for president? Is it Joe or Jill?
So I think that it's Lady Macbeth Jill Biden. I mean, Lady Mick Biden, I guess, if you will. I mean, she is the one who's calling the shots here. And, I've been speculating that for a while, that she really is the woman behind the curtain, so to speak. And now the media here in the United States seems to be picking up on that. I have no idea what she wants. I mean, look, Joe Biden has been in Washington, D.C. for a half century. He first got to the U.S. Senate in 1974. He's run for president 3 or 4 times. The first time was before I was even born, back in 1988. What more could you want? I mean, you've had the reins of power. And, even holding aside this Lady Macbeth just zeal for power, if you are a wife shouldn't you have some sense of humiliation and shame when your husband gets out there and just completely embarrasses himself in front of the entire world the way that he did on that CNN presidential debate? Even if Jill Biden is not an American patriot, and I have good reason for suspecting that she probably is not a staunch patriot, even if you're not, surely you care as a wife to your spouse, who the most recent reports show there might be Parkinson's disease, medical experts now coming into the White House. It's a mess. It's an absolute mess. But yes, Joe Biden is definitely not calling the shots. He's definitely not the one who's receiving the classified information every morning in the president's daily brief. He's not the one who's making the life or death decisions with the nuclear football. And again, as an American myself, I gravely fear for this country, and everyone around the world ought to care, because America obviously is still a superpower, at least nominally speaking.
Absolutely. It's extremely concerning when the leader of the free world has been reduced to a baby and is no longer calling the shots. And now it's been revealed that for his events, President Biden's staffers actually prepare a short document with large print and photos that include his precise path to a podium. Not that he ever gets it right, but how tragic. I mean, the guy can't even walk into a straight line to the podium without some direction.
But here's the irony of all, okay? So Axios, I'm happy you flagged Axios. Axios is a liberal Google-funded outlet here that is in the tank for Democrats. And Axios, like many of the liberal corporate media here in America, has now gone all in over the past week and a half trying to shunt Biden aside. Axios, for the 2 years prior to that, 2.5 years, every single time one of us, like myself, had the temerity, had the chutzpah to get up there and say, oh, Joe Biden's not fully there. Have you seen his mental and physical decline? They would say, shut up, you deplorable right-wing MAGA kook. And they just said it over and over again. And now they're flipping on a switch, and they're basically just racing. The New York Times, CNN, USA Today, Axios, they're just racing to see who can be the first on any given day, NDNY, to produce the latest bombshell story. Sorry, media, it's only a bombshell to you because you deliberately buried your head in the sand trying to cover for your precious for the past few years. This was not a bombshell to any of us. We all saw this coming there. So the whole thing, again, it would be simply farcical if it were not so utterly dangerous. I mean, my number one thought when I was watching that CNN presidential debate, the thought I had over and over again was, oh my God, I mean, what conversations are they having right now in Beijing? I mean, you know that Xi Jinping is on the phone with the People's Liberation Army. They're probably saying, let's go invade Taiwan probably the day after tomorrow. So it would be merely pathetic if it weren't so actually dangerous.
Spot on. And the White House is more concerned of whether or not the president can walk in a straight line to a podium. Meanwhile, there's actually big global issues out there that are completely being ignored. Now, a former Obama advisor, Van Jones, has suggested that Vice President Kamala Harris is effectively being positioned as the party's de facto nominee, regardless of President Joe Biden's official status in the race. I mean, talk about desperation. Kamala Harris has been one of the most unelectable people in Democrat history, and yet she's the de facto.
Look, Kamala Harris is a bad politician. I mean, she did not win a single primary vote in the 2020 Democratic Party primary. She was out well before Iowa, which voted first that year in the caucuses. She was explicitly tapped to be the vice president solely for identity politics reasons. And, you know, if that's really the Democrats' best shot, then that says a lot about the current state of their party. But she really is the only viable alternative at this point to Joe Biden for multiple reasons. The one reason is what I just said, is that this is a party in 2022 that selected Ketanji Brown Jackson to be their new Supreme Court justice explicitly because she was a black woman. So the notion that they would somehow skip over Kamala Harris to go pick Gavin Newsom or Gretchen Whitmer or anyone who was not a specifically black or maybe Hispanic woman, the notion that they would do that is ludicrous. That's not who this party is. They are an intersectional identity politics worshiping cult to their core in the year 2024. But the second reason why it can't be anyone other than Kamala Harris is because in America, our campaign finance laws are somewhat complicated. But essentially, if you donate to the Biden-Harris campaign And right now that campaign has over $200 million sitting in its bank accounts. You can't just then transfer that money to a different entity. That money either sits there or it might go back to the donors, or maybe it goes to the DNC, the Democratic National Committee. Frankly, it's actually an open question as to whether that money would even stay there if Joe Biden drops out, because say it's Harris Whitmer or whatever, it's a different entity. So it's legally untested as it is, but if they want any chance of keeping that $200+ million, it would have to be Kamala. But again, the fact that this is the choice that Democrats are facing, I think says everything you need to know about the current state of their party.
Gee, it speaks volumes, doesn't it? That's incredible to hear. Now, look, Donald Trump looks likely to announce his vice president just before or during the Republican National Convention next week. Who do you think he might go with?
Well, I'll tell you who I think he should go with, and he happens to be one of the front runners. So my answer is basically the same both ways. I think that he should go with J.D. Vance, who is the young, precocious 39-year-old senator from Ohio, and I'll explain to you why. You know, a lot of people, when they start playing the vice presidential sweepstakes game, they start doing a little checklist. Okay, who fits a certain demographic box? You know, that's why you hear a lot of talk about Tim Scott, because he's a black man in the U.S. Senate, or maybe Ben Carson, who was the black former HUD director. And then you see some people talk about, oh, who was in a certain key state? Okay, maybe Glenn Youngkin in Virginia. To me, J.D. Vance is the best pick for at least two very important reasons. One is, if you get down to brass tacks, the way that you win a presidential election in the United States is via the Electoral College. It is a race to 270 electoral votes. Right now, Donald Trump has a commanding lead in essentially what we call the Sun Belt down here. That's Nevada, Arizona, North Carolina, Georgia, all of the warmer weather states, where it's still sometimes within the margin of error, not always, but where it is still sometimes within the margin of error in the polling is the Rust Belt. So Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan specifically. Trump's going to have to win at least one of those three. Now, he's in good shape right now, frankly, in all three, especially Pennsylvania, but that's really where you want to double down. That happens to be J.D. Vance's core base right there. He's a guy from Ohio who wrote a famous book called Hillbilly Elegy. He speaks to white working class voters in the Rust Belt better than anyone currently on Trump's list. And the other reason why I think he's the best pick right now is because, as I mentioned, he's a very young guy. He's 39 years old. He speaks to the discontent that millennials and Gen Z have to the boomers who have spent like drunken sailors, who have been trying to march all around the world, invading countries to no avail and so forth. And at a time when Democrats are currently hemorrhaging youth support as it is, I think J.D. Vance can only solidify that exodus of young voters from the Democrats to the Republican Party.